All right, thank you for being here. You are getting older when events in a history book are things that you remember. I was a child in the 1970s, but even then, I had an awareness of what was going on around me. In 1979, I was 10 years old, which is the same age as my son, who will shortly be turning 11 years old. And, children absorb more than you think. And there were things going on in the 70s that could not be hidden from me. I noticed the anxiety among the adults that I encountered regarding economic issues. And I certainly remember, because this was unavoidable, I certainly remember waiting in line to buy gasoline. Like right now, you may be unhappy that gas prices have gone so high, but I remember when not only did gas prices go up, but that you couldn't get it. I remember when gasoline was rationed and the gas stations would check your license plate number. And depending on the number of your license plate, they had odd and even days. And you were not allowed to buy gasoline if you showed up on the wrong day. And then even on the days where you could buy it, there were limits on how much you could buy. I think it was like 10 gallons or 12 gallons or something like that. And then there were occasions where you would be waiting in some cases, for hours. And then you would get up to the gas pump, and sometimes you would discover after waiting all that time that they were sold out and there was none. There is a lot of talk right now about the fact that economically, inflation, which refers to rising prices, is higher at any point since the 1970s, that inflation is now at a 40-year high, and that prices are going up, not just the price of gasoline, but everything else. I recently purchased airline tickets to visit my mother in Florida, and the cost is double what it was. So there are several reasons why we are experiencing inflation right now. Clearly, the coronavirus pandemic has interrupted the supply chain. And when you have demand for certain goods greater than supply, prices go up. Certainly, if you look at the used car market, pre-owned vehicles now are getting a premium because of a shortage of new vehicles due to computer chip supply chain problems. When the coronavirus pandemic happened, one of the first things that President Biden did was try to support a coronavirus relief package, which is understandable. But the problem is that when you continue to, provide money, the value of the money is diminished. Its buying power is diminished. The idea, for example, of trying to solve everyone's financial problems by simply, let's just give more money. And I'm not saying that people should not receive help when we're in a crisis. That's not my point. But my point is that if you do not manage things very thoughtfully, and there's a lot of talk right now about let's wipe out all student debt and all the rest of it, and it sounds great. let's give everybody more money and let's wipe out all your debts. And it sounds wonderful. I'd like to have, more money myself, and I'd like to have my debts paid off. But the idea that you can do this without economic consequences is a problem. There are economic and financial consequences to what we do. Interest rates have slowly gone up as a way of trying to put the brakes on rising prices. I am older than most of my students. I remember quite clearly when interest rates were double digits. I remember people shopping for homes. Imagine buying a home with an interest rate of 18% on your mortgage. And I remember vividly when I was a new college student. I graduated from high school and I was in college. And I remember my parents having a conversation when interest rates fell below 10% and had fallen to 9% or 8%. And I remember my parents having a conversation like, wow, isn't that amazing? Interest rates under 10%. So I remember this. A lot of the events that I will cover with you today, I was young, but I was there in the sense that I was aware of these events. The history that I will discuss with you, not all of it, but a lot of it, I experienced when it was still current events. So someday, many of you, when you are older, as I am, you will be able to tell your kids, oh, I remember the coronavirus pandemic. And, I remember when, you couldn't buy toilet paper because everybody bought it all. And someday your kids may learn about this rather unhappy period in our history, and you'll be able to say, I remember when that happened. That's how you know you're getting older. So let's talk about the 70s. Richard Nixon won the 1968 presidential election. He was inaugurated in 1969. And he was certainly an experienced politician, but a very bitter man, a very suspicious man. He felt that he had been robbed of the presidency in the 1960 election. He was very bitter when he tried to run for governor of California and lost to Pat Brown. But in 68, he made a comeback. And if you watch the video, or if you've already seen the video on 1968, look, 1968 was a horrible year. There's no other way to say it. It was a terrible year. And people looked at Nixon as representing a return to some sort of stability, law and order. And he won that election. Nixon inherited the Vietnam War from his predecessor. He had spoken about his secret plan to try to end the war, but in reality, he didn't have any special plan to end the war. He does begin to remove some of the ground troops, but he escalates the bombing of targets in North Vietnam, including targets in neighboring Cambodia, which resulted in the anti-war protests, which ultimately led to the incident at Kent State University, where 4 college students were killed on campus by soldiers serving in the National Guard. Nixon basically escalated the bombing of North Vietnam, and his basic policy was, you will negotiate a deal with me to end this, or I will bomb you to the Stone Age. And he escalated the bombing very intensely. But Nixon did have a good grasp of foreign policy, sort of. He saw things on a global scale. And he realized, of course, that the North Vietnamese communists that we were fighting were also being supported by China and Russia at that time, the Soviet Union. And Nixon also understood that China and the Soviet Union, although both communist countries, did not necessarily completely trust each other. And Nixon felt that if he could establish diplomatic relations with China, it would put him in a better position to negotiate with Russia. And the reality is, I mean, Nixon, his presidency is going to be undone because of the Watergate scandal. Nixon, in many ways, is like a character created by the ancient Greeks or by Shakespeare. I mean, here is a man who is born into a poor family. His childhood is certainly not easy. And through intelligence and hard work, he educates himself, he goes to college, he serves in World War II. After World War II, he enters political life. He is as a congressman and then vice president. And finally, after having lost the presidency, now he is finally president of the United States. When he runs for re-election, he crushes his Democratic opponent, George McGovern. He just crushes him. And you would think that Nixon is on his way to being an extremely successful president, but in the end, he blows it. He self-destructs, and he himself admits, after the fact, that he essentially does this. He did this to himself. He is a very flawed figure. One of Nixon's achievements in 1972 is that he pays a visit to China. We did not have formal diplomatic relations with China. And Nixon, despite the fact that he is very clearly anti-communist, he is also a realist. And I think that's one of the lessons that I like from people who have moments of success, whether we're talking about Nixon, whether we're talking about Franklin Roosevelt. I think one of the great lessons that all politicians should learn is that you can have your beliefs, but do not allow your ideological views to stand in the way of doing what is necessary and what is practical. Nixon may not have liked communism, and he may not have liked the government of China, but he recognized that it was in our interests to at least have a relationship where we could talk to them and do business with them. So Nixon goes to China, and we established diplomatic relations with China, and it was a major foreign policy achievement. There's no denying that. Then, following that, Nixon is able to successfully negotiate a significant nuclear arms reduction treaty with the Soviet Union called SALT, SALT I. SALT stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And Nixon successfully does that. It's also worth pointing out that it was under Nixon that the federal government created the Environmental Protection Agency. Nixon wants the United States to get out of Vietnam, but he wants at least to give South Vietnam a fighting chance. So there's no real nice way to say this. He bombs the hell out of North Vietnam and even bombs neighboring Cambodia. Negotiations are taking place in Paris. And eventually, we get to 1973, and these Paris peace accords, the peace agreement is signed, which will technically end America's involvement in Vietnam. and we will begin the process of bringing our troops home. This is in 1973. So you would think, I mean, we can argue and debate about whether Nixon's escalation of the bombing, what that represents. I mean, in the end, what we now know is that Vietnam was a lost cause so far as the Americans were concerned, because in 1975, after Nixon is no longer president, North Vietnam is going to break the agreement, the peace agreement. They will attack South Vietnam, they will conquer South Vietnam, and the entire Vietnam War was all for nothing. And all the billions of dollars spent and all the people killed and all the destruction, at the end of the day, we did not accomplish our objective. I mean, at least in the Korean War, as horrible as it was, at least we can look at Korea today and say we saved South Korea, which today is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. We did not save South Vietnam in the end. We pulled out. Nixon was gone by 75. The North Vietnamese broke the agreement. They realized that we weren't going back. Nixon's replacement, President Gerald Ford, goes to Congress and asks Congress for money to help support South Vietnam. And Congress says, we are done. We're done. And in one of the most humiliating moments in American history, the American embassy in Saigon was overrun, and we are trying to evacuate our people and evacuate innocent Vietnamese who had helped the Americans. And there's this imagery and video of helicopters landing on the roof of the embassy building as people are frantically trying to escape. So it was not a happy time. But Nixon has under his belt, his visit to China in 72, the SALT I treaty with the Soviet Union in 73. He does get the North Vietnamese to sign the Paris Agreement to end the war. Nixon did give a private assurance to the president of South Vietnam that we would offer military support if the North Vietnamese broke the agreement. But once Nixon was gone, that was the end of that. 1973 is also the year of the famous Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision, which is now very much in the news. In 1973, the Supreme Court, in the decision Roe versus Wade, establishes that a woman can have an abortion, that she has a constitutional right to have an abortion if she is pregnant and wishes to terminate the pregnancy. And of course, now, with that leaked draft from the Supreme Court recently, the possibility exists that the Roe versus Wade decision may be overturned, which is very divisive. So, what's interesting, one of the reasons why I think it's important for students to learn history is that whether we like it or not, there is always a connection between current events and past events. If you look at things happening in the country today, and if you look at things happening in the world today, they all have origin stories that predate our time in most cases. So here we are, Roe versus Wade is back in the news. And we don't know what the final ruling of the court is going to look like, but if the draft version is any indication, then this Supreme Court case may in fact be overturned. 1973 was the year of Roe versus Wade. Nixon destroys himself. There's no other way to put it. Nixon was a very suspicious man. He had famously what was known as his enemies list. And Nixon basically had this attitude that your political enemies are always looking to attack you. And sometimes it's better to try to get them first before they get you. And Nixon had an enemies list. I mean, he was very antagonistic regarding the press. Although I'll say this, I mean, the media today, I think, on both sides is considerably more partisan than it was then. I mean, today, for example, I mean, if you're a conservative, you watch Fox. If you're a liberal, you watch CNN. You know, people gravitate toward sources that reinforce their pre-existing beliefs. But Nixon felt that the media in general was really out to get him deliberately. And he felt that the Democrats were out to get him, and by God, he was going to get them first. There were classified documents related to the Vietnam War that had been leaked to the Washington Post and were published by the Washington Post, also published by the New York Times. I think I'm trying to remember if it was I think it was the New York Times that published it first, and then the Washington Post later. So actually the information was leaked to the New York Times first. These were secret classified documents about the Vietnam War that basically showed that the Vietnam War was not going as the American people had been told. These documents became known as the Pentagon Papers. And much of the criticism was not directed against Nixon personally. It revealed information from Kennedy and Johnson, but Nixon was furious at the idea of classified information being leaked to the press at all. And he felt that the FBI was not doing what needed to be done to try to find out where these leaks were coming from and stop it. So in what is, I think, one of the dumbest ideas you could think of, people within the Nixon administration basically said, well, maybe we need to take care of this personally. Maybe what we need to do is put together a team to trace the source of leaked information and try to prevent it or retaliate, whatever we can do. And this, organization, they called themselves the Plumbers, because plumbers fix leaks. And they were going to use this team not only to try and prevent the leak of classified material, but also as a way of investigating or attacking, getting dirt on Nixon's political enemies. So Nixon is running for re-election. In 1972 is an election year. And let's see, 68, 69. Yeah, 72 is an election year. And Nixon's opponent was George McGovern. Now, Nixon crushed McGovern in the general election. So the great irony of what I'm about to tell you is none of this was necessary. But Nixon basically wanted dirt on the Democrats. So the Democratic Party had their headquarters in the Watergate building. That's why it's called the Watergate scandal. It's named after the Watergate building. And the Watergate building, which in my opinion is a very ugly building, was a multi-purpose complex. There was a hotel there. There were office buildings there. So there's a break-in at the headquarters of the Democratic Party. And the burglars are caught. Now, question number one is, why would anybody want to break into the headquarters of the Democratic Party? That's question number one. And then question number two is, these burglars look really odd. These are burglars who have walkie-talkies. They are dressed in business suits. They have a lot of cash on them. The whole thing just looked very, very suspicious. There were two young reporters who worked at the Washington Post newspaper, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Bob Woodward had someone that he knew who worked at the FBI. So he calls this person up and he says, what's up with this Watergate thing? And the man says, don't call me, don't talk to me, no comment, I have nothing to say, leave me alone. So, okay. Shortly after that, Woodward receives a secret note hidden in his morning newspaper. Meet me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Let's meet at this underground parking garage. Come by yourself, make sure nobody follows you. It's all very kind of suspicious and odd. So Woodward shows up, and this FBI source basically says, I will help you unlock the mystery of Watergate, but you are going to have to do your own investigating, and I will point you in the right direction, and I will confirm what you discover. But I will agree to do this provided that I am never revealed as your source. My identity must be kept secret. So the guy says, okay. And the basic advice that he gives is follow the money. These Watergate burglars were paid, find out who paid them and where the money came from. Even at the beginning, when they were arrested, one of the burglars had an address book on him that had a phone number to the White House. So right away, there's something fishy going on here. The investigation occurred, and what was discovered is these Watergate burglars were being paid out of a fund for the re-election of President Richard Nixon. And the question then becomes, well, who had access to that money? Who has authority to basically distribute that money? And it leads to Nixon's attorney general, Nixon's chief of staff, Nixon's re-election campaign manager, and the money is traced. And it becomes clear that people in the Nixon administration are involved in this. The secret source, for many years, his identity was kept secret, and nobody knew who he was. In those days, forgive me for what I'm about to say to you, but in those days, as disgusting as this may sound, people actually used to go to movie theaters to watch pornographic films. And one of the most famous pornographic films of the 70s was a film called Deep Throat. That was the name of the film. So since nobody would give the name of this secret FBI source, he was simply referred to as Deep Throat, as sort of a joke around the newspaper because he was on deep background. And one of the great mysteries of Watergate for many years was, who is this guy? Well, we actually know who he is now. After many years, he got older, he developed Alzheimer's disease, he was losing his mind and his memory, and he agreed, while he still was able to make the decision, that he would reveal himself. And it turned out to be that he was actually the number 2 man at the FBI. He was not just some low-level agent. He was a big shot, and his name was Mark Felt. And he was the one who he disliked Nixon and thought that what Nixon was doing was wrong, and he was the source. So that we know. Congress begins investigating. And during the course of the investigation, Nixon's attorney, John Dean, basically realizes that this is going nowhere. And it's John Dean who says to Nixon, there's a cancer on the presidency and it's growing. And Nixon's response to this is, we just need to get some money, and we need to pay these Watergate burglars and give them a bunch of money to make them just stay quiet. And Nixon talks about, we're going to need $1 million, and I know where we can get it. And, it was clear that this cover-up was going to continue. Every conversation was recorded. There were tapes of every private conversation in the White House when Nixon was there. And when Congress was investigating this, they discovered that. And they asked for Nixon to turn over the tapes. And he said, no, I won't do that. And the Supreme Court said, Yes, you will. The tapes do not show that Nixon ordered the break-in or that he knew about the break-in. Personally, I think he did know about it. But there's no evidence on the tapes, at least so far. But what nailed Nixon was the cover-up. On one tape, Nixon is clearly heard saying, call the FBI, no, call the CIA and tell the CIA to contact the FBI to advise them to stop investigating Watergate because of national security issues. And then there's another conversation where Nixon talks about raising $1 million to pay off the burglars. And that was the smoking gun that ultimately is going to nail Richard Nixon. Congress then begins impeachment proceedings. Now, we in this country have seen many impeachments, more than you would think. Andrew Johnson was impeached. Bill Clinton was impeached. Donald Trump was impeached twice. None of the impeachments worked to remove a sitting president from office. Nixon was about to be impeached, and I think he would have been removed. Impeachment would have removed Nixon. And Nixon knew that, which is why in 1974, he became the only president in American history to resign from the office. So, he resigns, and I have a video clip about Watergate. This is in the module as well, but it won't take long. I just want to give you a little summary. And the press and the media had a field day with Nixon because of his behavior and his manner. Nixon would had this sort of, I can't describe it. He would just say these weird things, and he would say, well, people have got to know whether their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got. And people just made fun of him. There's a comedian named Rich Little who basically made a career out of imitating Richard Nixon. It's funny stuff. I mean, Nixon's behavior doesn't help. So I want to give you a sample of this. So check this out here.
The crisis in Vietnam would soon be replaced by a new crisis at home. A growing scandal stemming from a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the office complex known as Watergate. Hearings on Watergate dragged one White House aide after another in front of Congress to answer questions about systematic wrongdoing in the highest office in the land.
Watergate was certainly a fascinating spectacle. Suddenly, all the bad things the left had been saying throughout the Vietnam protests seemed to be proven true in spades.
Mr. Butterfield, will you stand?
The televised hearings drew in an enormous audience.
You swear the evidence that you shall give.
This was the first time the American people had ever heard that a president of the United States did things like that. But I guarantee you, he knew what the predecessors had done. It didn't all start with Watergate. There was ample precedent for everything that Nixon did. Nixon got caught.
There was one outrageous charge after another, break-ins, spying on anti-war activists, punishing political enemies.
In all of the millions of words of testimony, there is not the slightest suggestion that I had any knowledge of the planning for the Watergate break-in.
Congressional committees and their battery of lawyers were bringing the charges closer to the Oval Office. One of the president's lawyers at the time was Leonard Garment.
This was the show of the week, the month, the year, decade for young lawyers. Hello, young lawyers, wherever you are. And they were drawn by the excitement of the pursuit of the great white whale, all these Ahabs.
There was a constant pursuit by Congress and the press. It sometimes seemed the administration was coming unpinned. It looked that way in New Orleans when President Nixon shoved Press Secretary Ron Ziegler toward a horde of reporters.
And Nixon was trying every which way. How could he save his presidency? How could he pin it on somebody else? How could he rationalize what happened?
The Nixon White House was in at least from the external and even from the journalist point of view, was in real shambles. They were paralyzed. I mean, they could do nothing but defend against Watergate.
And in the middle of all that, the country was subjected to further signs of collapse.
I will not resign if indicted. I will not resign if indicted.
In October of 1973, Vice President Agnew, the administration's top spokesman for law and order, did resign after he was charged with extortion, bribery, and tax evasion in a separate scandal all his own.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
But even as his allies were falling around him, the president was determined to finish his watch.
Thank you very much.
I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Imagine a president of the United States in a news conference on national television saying, I'm not a crook. You know, you never even before that ever conceived that a president might be a crook. It just all began to mount up, and ultimately, it was a collapse.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions...
Finally, it was all
have been
too
made that
overwhelming,
shape the
even for the toughest of
of
battle-scarred
this
politicians.
each time. I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
You could never take the presidency quite as seriously again. It maybe was purgative. It kind of ended that particular unhappy decade, to have Nixon resign and the rather blank but benign figure of Jerry Ford take over. His resignation was a relief, casting off of an old snakeskin, moving forward.
In April of 1975, 2 years after American combat troops had left Vietnam, North Vietnamese forces reached the outskirts of Saigon, the South Vietnamese capital. An ally the United States had supported with men and material for nearly 2 decades was about to fall to the communists.
It's almost like we were never there now. And that's the tragedy of it, I think.
On April the 29th, there were still more than 1,000 American personnel in the city. They and 6,000 desperate South Vietnamese were helicoptered out as the last remnants of American power fled Saigon. Veteran Phil Caputo had returned to Vietnam as a reporter.
And the North Vietnamese were shelling Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Boy, I remember some of those shells landing close to me. The building was just trembling. And somebody said, go, go, go. And I remember running out and just leaping in this big CH-53 helicopter, huge thing.
Come on, this way, hey, this way, come on. Come on, let's go.
Must have been 60, 70, maybe 80 Vietnamese refugees and a few American newsmen, a handful of people from the embassy. And then the helicopter took off. I remember just looking down and just seeing this brown and green country. And then we crossed the coast. The sight I'll never forget, the 7th Fleet had mustered out there. They were going to take refugees out. I looked at all of this might, and I said, we got whipped by a bunch of peasant guerrillas in the end.
On the next day, victorious North Vietnamese troops rolled into Saigon.
10 o'clock in the morning, the radio announced that, the South Vietnamese had surrendered. And that was it. We hugged one another and cried. And for me, it's a long many long years. And now we see the final day.
I felt in a whole range of emotions. I mean, I felt sad, I felt regretful, I felt relieved that it was over. But maybe the one emotion I didn't feel was any sense of happiness or joy.
I felt a sense of loss. Like, it stays with you forever. Vietnam will be there until the day I join the friends of mine who died before me. I think it won't ever go away.
For America, the fall of Vietnam would symbolize the end of an era, the post-war era of confidence, unity, and optimism. America had found that there were some burdens too great to bear, and some prices too steep to pay.
Yeah, doesn't look too good, does it? Does it? And there's more. It isn't like everything was just great after that. I mean, the rest of the 70s was, I remember it. I remember it well. Want to see what I used to do when I was a kid? I remember this. Tell me what you think of this. Watch this.
Energy crisis, which has been going on all decade, only gets worse with Middle Eastern turmoil.
Californians sat fuming in their cars, waiting impatiently in long lines, wondering who and what had put them there. Somehow, there wasn't enough gasoline to go around. But prices rose elsewhere, and lines began forming, and Americans began realizing that California was not unique. California was first.
People in this country always worry about the price of gas, but this was worried about the availability of gas.
While the oil producers were getting ready for another price increase, the oil consumers were beginning to meet in Japan. President Carter's state visit began today.
Is there anything immediate you can do to reduce the gas lines in the United States?
My information is that in the next few weeks, hopefully sooner, there will be an increase in supply of gasoline to the affected areas.
I think it's phony. I think they're trying to get the prices jacked up. That's my personal opinion.
What was once a distant foreign policy issue has become a domestic issue.
A truck strike has driven food prices upward, slowed industry, and resulted in violence. The bloodiest episode in Levittown, Pennsylvania. 32 people were injured when motorists joined the truckers in protesting the fuel shortage.
The crowd of 2,000 to 3,000, mostly young teenagers, packed the intersection, and then it turned violent.
This is Levittown, Pennsylvania. This is the perfect quintessential symbol of Middle America. And Middle America is in torment about the gas crisis.
Sunday, July 1st. Because of the gas lines, President Carter flies straight home from the Tokyo Economic Summit and announces a television speech to the nation Thursday. Then to Camp David by helicopter, presumably to work on that energy speech. But then a sudden change. The energy speech is canceled with no explanation. Critics speak of indecision.
Well, and now here we are. I mean, gas prices are high, but it's still available, at least for now. At that time, the prices were high and it wasn't always available. And prices rose because of inflation. And there are people who think that right now we are on the edge of living through the 1970s 2.0, at least from a financial point of view, from an economic one. So as I said, you know you are getting old when you remember these things. And as I said, I mean, Stephen said he was a child at the time. So was I. And I don't know if you remember, Stephen, having to wait in line for gasoline. I sure do. And I remember the tension. And when you would wait in line, you would often turn off the engine of your car because you didn't want to waste gas. But if it was a hot summer day and you're waiting in the hot car, no air conditioning on, I remember this very well. I remember that if we had to do a family trip somewhere, we had to plan when we would leave and when we would come back based on our availability to buy gasoline. I remember this. So, you know, there we are. With regard to the 70s, there remains conflict in the Middle East. Right now, many countries are worried about the possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon. There is the unresolved Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Syria is in ruins. The Russians went into Afghanistan and failed. And then after 9/11, the Americans went into Afghanistan and we accomplished in the end nothing. Just like we ended up getting out of Vietnam without having accomplished anything. Afghanistan is right back where it was. All the money spent, all the people killed, and the Taliban is back. You know, you want to laugh, but it's not funny. You know, when you look at the suffering of innocent people. You know, and of course, if you paid attention when we evacuated from Afghanistan, especially for older people, you know, what came to mind was this crazy haphazard evacuation in Vietnam in 1975. So, you know, history, you know, it's not exactly the same, but boy, it sure has some similarities, doesn't it? If you ever need an essay to write and you have to come up with something quick, just compare and contrast America's failure in Afghanistan with America's failure in Vietnam. It's an easy one to do. I mean, they're different, but the end result seems to be the same. The reasons why we went in are different. And the great lesson of both Vietnam and Afghanistan is military power does not guarantee victory. If just because you're stronger doesn't mean you're going to win. You would think that the Russians are finding out right now as they've attempted to invade Ukraine quite unsuccessfully so far. And of course, a lot of innocent people have been killed. And it's always innocent people who get killed. Innocent people have been killed in Ukraine. We could talk about innocent people who died in Afghanistan, Syria. It's just part of me as a historian feels like, you know, we need to talk about this, and another part of me is just disgusted, utterly disgusted by it all. It's like, when do we learn? When does it end? You know, and it just doesn't. So, you know, the 70s wasn't so hot. And then we end up with Jimmy Carter wins the 1976 election. He defeats Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was a very decent man, by the way. I like Gerald Ford, but people wanted to bring in an outsider who was not connected in any way to the events of Watergate. And Gerald Ford, he needs Watergate to go away. So Gerald Ford did something that was very controversial. He used his power as president to give Richard Nixon a pardon. Now, Gerald Ford is doing this because he needs Watergate to go away so we can focus on the issues at hand. But a lot of people interpreted Gerald Ford's pardon as letting Nixon get away with it. And it may have cost him the election when he ran in 1976. But Gerald Ford was very much a decent man. Jimmy Carter, who's still alive, I mean, he's not a bad man. He becomes president, and in my opinion, he simply is confronted with problems that overwhelm him. I don't dislike Jimmy Carter personally. I just feel that he lacked the leadership qualities that are necessary in a time of crisis. And we were getting hammered. And then there's a revolution in Iran. The United States, for many years, had supported the Shah of Iran, who, frankly speaking, ruled Iran as a dictator. And there was a revolution in Iran. And all of a sudden, with this revolutionary radical government in Iran, now the Americans are our enemy number one. And we have had problems with Iran ever since. We have problems with Iran right now. I mean, Biden is trying to reconstruct this, nuclear deal that Obama put together because, we're concerned about the possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon. And it isn't just the United States. I mean, Iran obviously, they look as they call the United States the great Satan. They're obviously anti-American. Certainly the Iranians are hostile to Israel, but you also have to bear in mind that the Gulf Arab countries are very concerned about Iran as well. And there's a lot of this that's political and religious. It goes back into this divide between Sunni and Shia. And there's a lot, everybody wants simple explanations for things. And the reality is that a lot of these issues are very complex and multifaceted. Look, the Gulf Arab countries, many of them have normalized relations with Israel, which is extraordinary to me, just unbelievable to me. And why? Because they're not worried about Israel. They may be sympathetic to the Palestinians, but they're worried about Iran. They're not worried about Israel, they're worried about Iran. And, it's the ultimate example of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. People form alliances because of a mutual need. If you and I don't like each other, but we're both scared of this other person, then maybe we're going to try to, work together because we both have a similar concern. I mean, that to me is the ultimate essence of what politics is all about. At the end of the day, politics at the end of the day is about the pursuit of self-interest. So when you look, that's what it is. Come on. So when you look at a country like Dubai or the United Arab Emirates or even Saudi Arabia, they're willing to work with the Israelis. It's because they're all worried about Iran. But this problem with Iran goes back to 1979. And when this revolution took place, the American embassy was attacked, and the Americans inside were held as hostages. And they were held as hostages for 444 days. How do I know that? Because I was in 5th grade, and every single day on the news, the first thing you saw was, it's day 25 of the hostage crisis. It's day 200 of the hostage crisis. And it went on day after day after day after day. My 5th grade teacher, as an assignment, had us write letters to the hostages. I remember doing it. I'm 10 years old, I'm in 5th grade, and I'm writing a letter. I hope you're okay. President Carter is working hard to try to get you to come home. I remember doing it as an assignment. And the hostages were actually released on the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration. And when they returned to the United States and they were flown into New York, they were taken to West Point, the military academy, where they were going to receive, medical examination and have a chance to rest. And I lived in New York State, and I'm 10 or 11 years old. And I remember my father said, let's go see them. And we got in the car and we drove to West Point, and we parked along the side of the road, and we all held up signs, welcome home. And the buses came, and I'm there waving, hi, how are you? And I could see them waving back. I remember this. I have a picture of it somewhere. So you know you're getting old when you remember these things. And poor Jimmy Carter, I mean, nothing went right for him. At one point, he decided he's going to try to do a special ops rescue mission. We're going to have helicopters with special forces take off from Saudi Arabia, and they're gonna come in and they're gonna go into Tehran, and they're gonna rescue the hostages. Well, it didn't work. The damn helicopters crashed in the desert. People got killed. I mean, it just gave this impression. Is it Carter's fault that the rescue mission failed? No, but it reinforced this perception that things are going pretty badly and Carter is just not able to manage it. One of the major successes that Jimmy Carter deserves credit for was the negotiation of what became known as the Camp David Accords. After several wars, Jimmy Carter was able to help negotiate a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. And Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, the prime minister of Israel, met at the White House, and they signed the agreement and established peace. I would hardly say that these two countries are best friends, and that it's not a warm relationship, but both sides recognize that it's better for each side to have peace. And Jimmy Carter deserves credit for helping to do that. At the end of the day, it cost Anwar Sadat his life, because there were people in Egypt who opposed his willingness to make peace. And he was assassinated in 1981. And that's when Hosni Mubarak came in and ruled Egypt for many years after that. Peace is a wonderful thing, but if it's so wonderful, why don't we have more of it? It's easier to keep fighting than it is to make peace. It's the bottom line, and I respect people who are willing to take a chance for peace. And unfortunately, many of them pay the price. The Israelis had a prime minister named Yitzhak Rabin, who worked on trying to make peace with the Palestinians. He was assassinated. He was killed too. So, I mean, Gandhi, his whole life was devoted to peace. He was killed. I mean, there are a lot of people in this world who are more comfortable with conflict than with peace. And that is an unfortunate situation. You have to be a very brave person to sit down with an enemy and say, a lot of bad things have happened, but let's see if we can work this out so that they don't continue. So that is my summary of the 70s. I was a child in the 70s. I did watch the Brady Bunch. I do remember shag carpet. I do remember rotary telephones. And I remember disco. I remember the music. Let's see. How's this sound? If you want to understand the culture of the 70s, watch the movie Saturday Night Fever. If you want to understand that. And I remember how angry I was when my parents wouldn't let me watch it. Because it's a grown-up movie. I mean, there's a rape in this movie. There's racism and racial violence in this movie. But it shows the culture of the 70s. It's called Saturday Night Fever. Have any of you, I'm sure Stephen, I'm sure you've seen it. Have any of you seen it? Yeah, you want to understand the 70s, you got to watch that. Now, What I want to know before I end this class is if there's anyone here in this online class who can dance. Anybody here a good dancer? Mahmoud, I bet you are. No, you can't do it. Here, how about this one? Wait a minute. Here, let me give you some dance music, and you'll feel the beat, and you won't be able to control it. That is as 70s as it gets. You got to watch Saturday Night Fever. Here, maybe you've heard this one. You know that one? Yeah. Now, how do I turn it off? I'll tell you what I did. When the coronavirus pandemic first started and we started on campus, we had to switch to online. None of us were ready. It was very stressful. If you were going to school at the time, you know how bad it was. And everybody was miserable, the students, the teachers. So for extra credit, I offered an online disco dance party. So I played all the music and students had to, but you had, in order to get credit, you had to show up and you had to dance. And students who dressed up in 70s apparel received additional credit. That was the highlight of the start of the pandemic. So let me give you your extra credit and we will call it a day.